Thank you. And I want to thank Mike also for emphasizing that democracy is more than just voting. It's actually an idea that became, in some ways, regenerated in the early 60s with the idea of participatory democracy. Some of you might remember that, an old document called Port Huron Statement, for those of you who are really way back. But the whole idea being that it's not just structured in government, but in fact, it is an attitude and it's a direction of how you gain more control, whether it's your workplace or an institution like a university too. I think we would also include that as well. But I want to talk about one point that addresses the issue we're supposed to talk about, which is what does a real democracy look like? If you come away with one idea from what I'm going to say, it's probably an idea you haven't really thought about specifically, and yet it's in the background. And that is the answer to what does a real democracy look like? It looks like a real government. It looks like a real democratic government. And to a certain extent, I think what's happened throughout the history of this country, it's always back and forth, but since the 1980s, it's been particular emphasis on that the main enemy in the United States is the government. Now think about it. When we talk about having a democracy, even in the workplace, even when you look at what happened at SeaTac or here or any other city, it took workers to go out and protest. It took allies out there to get information out. But in the end, it was the law that was changed. It was government that did something. If you don't have a government that can change your working conditions, that can restrain those who are oppressing others because of the color of skin or because of their sexual orientation, then what you do is you shrink the sphere in which you can live in a democratic society. Call it social democracy or socialist democracy or democratic socialism, whatever you want to call it. Democracy is more than just a structure, but government is where the battle is. Now, give you an example. We would probably all agree that a real democracy does not have voter suppression. We do know, for instance, in the last 2 decades, 10 states have passed laws which literally have stripped people of their rights to go to the vote. We know, for instance, manipulation. We reduced the number of ballot places, for instance, in Arizona. We do know there's an ongoing emphasis to not even having voting places on campuses, where many of the students, in fact, would vote if there was an easy place to vote. That could be changed. It would take organization on campus. It's a minor thing, but you get people out to vote. A real democracy counts people who have a heart and a soul, perhaps, not a corporation. So what are we talking about then? How do you get to a real democracy? I think the battle, and I use military terms, I know, but you fall into that. The battle is between an ideology which has gained tremendous support in this country that Trump, quite honestly, has captured in his own sort of whimsical, maniacal sort of fashion, which is that freedom and liberty can only be achieved when you shrink government. That's the basis of libertarianism, basically, particularly right wing. In other words, you will be free if you don't have oppression, and oppression comes from government. Corporations are never mentioned. Ronald Reagan was the perfect spokesman. He became so popular, in many ways like Trump, amusing, friendly, chatty, and what did he say? He said basically, oh, what's the worst thing you could hear? I'm here to help you from government. And we all chuckled. Yeah, we all had. How many people criticize corporations? Because there's so many corporations, it's hard to focus. But there's only one government, so it's an easy target. How do we get there? How do we recapture our government as a democracy? And I think one of the first steps is we have to change our mindset. We not only have to start thinking about democracy in the workplace and democracy institutions like this, but we also have to start thinking about who is running our government. Now, I know we often say, well, corporations have too much power and they're corrupting all the folks, and if you vote for someone, often they can't accomplish anything because they're so frustrated. The right-wing strategy is literally to shrink government day by day, bit by bit. And how do you do that? Very subtly, but very effectively. I was just in Indianapolis, and this happens at all levels. I know we tend to think of government as federal. We have 20,000 municipal government units in the United States, okay? The minimum wage at $15 an hour, which we'll eventually get, would pay you about $30,000 a year. And we know that you can't get by on that. How many of you would apply for a job that would pay you half of that $15 minimum wage and be happy with it? Well, unless you're rich and you like the job, unless you have a partner who's willing to support you and say, yeah, go ahead and have a good time, unless you're retired and you don't care what standard of living you live in. That is what council members in Indianapolis get paid, $15,000 a year. And their population is 50% bigger than ours, and the area is at least 4 times bigger. So I'm thinking, okay, you don't get paid much. How many staff do you have? Each council member has 0 staff. I said, well, what's your office like? Oh, they don't have an office. They have a file drawer in a filing cabinet. This is a phony government, and this goes around across the country. The whole idea being government's bad, you can't do anything. People say, when I go to another city, like, oh, Seattle, you're full of liberals, that's why you get everything done. I said, no, that's not the case. That is not the case. That's buying into a mythology that somehow liberal-minded, socialist-minded people are somehow in a spot. Somehow we all got here, who knows how, and we changed the environment. I think the reason that we have some of the most progressive legislation in this country, everything from plastic bag bans to more transparency in government to obviously $15 minimum wage, the paid sick leave, is because we have a local government that does 2 things. One, it's a real government. People really have a job. They're not running off and selling insurance or being an attorney or working for a corporation. They can focus on what they need to do, which is basically look out for the people's interests, represent their interests, and improve people's living conditions. But also, because we have many portals to government. One of the things I argue in this book I wrote, Becoming a Citizen Activist, is that there are so many tools out there that we do not use because we hold ourselves back. 1 minute? Oh, 3 minutes. Great. I'll try to wrap this up. My basic message is this. Don't wait for someone else to lead the charge. Okay? You can't do it alone. So look for other people who want to join you on whatever particular issue there is. Look at the tools that are available, and you can make changes. Seattle made changes because people had an opportunity to participate in government. We had an opportunity to vote in people. We had, public financing down the road. We basically allow real democracy to occur. When you have real democracy, you do get social justice. You do get economic opportunity. You do get racial equity. But you have to still exercise that authority, that right, that responsibility. And you're not going to win the first time either. You may not win the second time, but you have to realize that it took 4 decades in Washington State to get same-sex marriage and legalize recreational marijuana. We're one of the first states in the nation to do that. It didn't happen overnight, but it was accomplished because people realized they could work together and realized they take one battle at a time, and whatever victory you receive, you celebrate that, and then you move on. I think this country can be a real democracy if we have citizens who are willing to be real activists, not super people, not superheroes, but just willing to look around and say, what is it about my life, whether it's a working condition or whether it's basically the environment around me, what is it that I want to improve, who can I unite with, what tools are available, and you can do it. Thank you.